The bells of St. Bartholomew Basilica tolled 11 times, each strike swelling through the stained glass hush like a weight heaved into deep water. At the rear of the cavernous nave, Ava Whitmore gripped a bouquet of white lilies so tightly the stems dug into her palms. Her knuckles were pale, almost bloodless, the flowers so stark and pristine they felt more fit for a casket than for a bride. Her bride. The lily's sweetness mixed with incense and old wood, and the perfume of it made her throat ache, like something was being embalmed inside her. She stepped onto the long scarlet runner, the sound of her heels swallowed by the crowd's collected silence. Faces turned, Chicago's medical aristocracy, the donors and judges and CEOs who could stop a restaurant with their names alone. She'd grown up among them in the Gold Coast's gracious rooms, back when Whitmore meant legacy and endowments, not late notices and private pleading. Now her walk felt less like entering a future than walking a gauntlet. The weight of every eye tightened around her like a velvet collar. At the altar, Dr. Rowan Hale waited with the composure of a man who'd been raised never to show the fracture before the break. He was devastating to look at. Dark hair tamed to obedient smoothness, jaw sharp enough to score glass. The custom tuxedo built to his athlete's frame as if it had been engineered, not sewn. His eyes were winter gray, the color of polished, surgical steel, and about as warm. When she reached his side, the scent of lilies pooled around them, the old incense crystallizing the air. Rowan tipped his head the slightest degree toward her, breath warm against her ear, voice low as a scalpel laid on a tray. "Let's just get this over with." The ceremony unfolded like a script none of them had wanted and all of them knew. Rowan's answers came clipped and precise, the cadences scrubbed of personality, like discussing a risky surgery's risks in a windowless consult room. When the priest extended the rings, his touch on her hand was careful and cool, like a transaction completed, not a vow forged. The gold caught the light and slipped onto her finger anyway. The kiss that was meant to sanctify felt like a stamp, a press of his mouth to hers, dry and efficient, as if sealing an envelope. At the back of the basilica, Victor Hale, Rowan's father, watched with a satisfaction that verged on predatory pride. This was the moment he'd curated down to the breath, when the striving Hale name braided itself to the antique filigree of Whitmore and could never be yanked free. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man who had cornered something rare and broken it to saddle. Only once they were inside the leather-scented quiet of the limousine did the thin facade rip. Rowan yanked at his bow tie, undoing it with a furious snap. City sound, sirens, shouts, the distant thunk of construction, muffled under tinted glass. He stared out at the towers like he wanted to cut them down. "The reception," Ava began, voice too small, too polite, even now. 3 hours, he said, slicing off the rest like he was amputating the wrong word. "We show up, shake hands, cut the cake, and dance exactly once for photographs. Then you can do whatever you want. I have surgery at dawn." "It's our wedding day," she said, and something fragile inside her lifted its head, defiant, even as it trembled. He turned to her. His gray eyes were complicated then, resentment lacquered over pity, a careful mix he'd probably practiced as a teenager. "No, Miss Whitmore," he said, then corrected with a blade of sarcasm. "Mrs. Hale, this isn't our wedding day. This is the day my father bought your family's name, and I paid the price for his social climbing. Nothing more." The limousine slid along Lakeshore Drive, the blue-gray sheet of Lake Michigan silvered with wind outside, the city stacked in glass and steel beyond. As they passed the river where the branches meet at Wolf Point, Ava understood with a clarity that stole the air from her lungs. She had traded her freedom for her mother's life. Somewhere uptown, in a quiet room at Northwestern Memorial, Maria Whitmore was breathing because machines commanded her body to. Every inhale was an invoice, every exhale a payment. And here, beside the stranger who was now her husband, the truth tugged her heart until it cracked, clean and devastating. This wasn't a beginning, it was a sentencing. 3 years earlier, the Whitmore mansion on Astor Street had still held the shape of old laughter. The house's wood-paneled study had echoed with family holidays and men in tuxedos telling stories with their hands. At 21, Ava stood in that same study and watched men in polos and moving gloves itemize her past. "Waterford crystal collection will fetch a decent price," one appraiser murmured into a recorder, voice papery with practiced detachment. "Oriental carpets, estimate revised, fading consistent with sunlight." Across the room, Maria sat in her wingback as if it could erase her, hands trembling in her lap like moths beating against glass. "Where is he?" she asked. The words sounded thin and brittle, like a wineglass about to crack in a dishwasher. Ava didn't have to ask who she meant. Her father had vanished again, evaporating into a haze of bourbon and markers he couldn't cover. His absence a contrail of betting slips and bad IOUs. The Whitmore pharmaceutical empire, the patents that had once put the family name on a dozen hospital wings, had been pawned piece by piece to pay for a compulsion that devoured futures. The investments had gone. The trust for Maria's care had gone. The account that had been meant for Ava's education was gone too, drained with the quiet efficiency of a thief who knew the house and all the secret places. "We need to discuss removal," the appraiser said softly, his expression a blend of pity and impatience that made Ava's chest stiffen. "The bank requires the property vacated by the end of the month." They had 4 days. That night, as Ava helped her mother sort through photo albums, the law had deemed photos sentimental and therefore without market value. Maria made a sound that Ava had never heard spill from her mother's careful mouth. The collapse came quick and ravenous. Later, a cardiologist with kind eyes and a white coat that looked too big would call it a severe myocardial infarction. In the ambulance, Ava counted the beats between the siren's cries and pretended it was proof her mother was still here. At Northwestern Memorial, the hours braided into something shapeless. Months of financial tension, of skipping meals to pay electric bills, of performing calm while drowning, added to the insult of loss, had pulled Maria's heart taut to tearing. "She'll need extensive treatment," Dr. Morrison said, a hand braced lightly against the hallway wall as if to keep his empathy from falling over. "Surgery, medication, round-the-clock care. I won't lie to you, Miss Whitmore. It will be expensive." The numbers on the cost sheet swam like minnows, darting out of focus. Even with their insurance, which had been pawned for a lower premium and a higher burden, the out-of-pocket looked like a mountain she had no shoes to climb. Ava felt a rush, something like grief and anger, and the dizzying need to fix it all with her bare hands. She could not breathe, and then she did, because the body insists even when the heart protests. Victor Hale appeared in that corridor the way benefactors in stories do, sleek and smiling, his bespoke suit a kind of armor he wore with ease. "Ava, my dear," he said, voice rich and warm, arms extended like he'd been waiting to be photographed. "I came as soon as I heard about Maria. How is she?" He had orbited the Whitmore family for years, always with the right bottle of wine at the right moment, always with a story of gratitude for Ava's grandfather, who had, once upon a different city, helped him find an office and his first patients. Victor's presence felt like a lifeline tossed into cold water. "You mustn't worry about the bills," he assured her, his hand light on her shoulder. "Maria will receive the best care Chicago can offer. I'll make sure of it." He leaned in, conspiratorial, kind. "Your grandfather gave me a beginning. Let me return the favor." 3 weeks later, Maria was stable. Not well, not safe, but not dying. That counted for everything. Victor invited Ava to lunch at the Union League Club, and the table gleamed with crystal and polished silver, the bisque buttery and arrogant. He asked about her mother. He asked about Ava's work, 3 part-time jobs tried on at once like an outfit that didn't fit, the seams biting, the fabric cheap. Then he laid his cards with the precision of a surgeon setting instruments in order. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Those were his words. A marriage. "Your mother would receive the finest long-term care," he said, the syllables smooth. "All expenses covered. You would have stability, and my son Rowan would have a wife who understands the weight and responsibility of a family name." That night, Ava watched the machines breathe for her mother and tried to imagine a road that wasn't this one. Her 3 jobs, the coffee shop, the children's bookstore, the late-night cleaning at an office tower where she sometimes cried in empty bathrooms, barely covered rent on their small apartment. The medical bills multiplied like cells. Without Victor's intervention, the hospital social worker had uttered the words, "state facility." And Ava had nodded like a polite person, but the thought had punched her breath away. Maria stirred, eyes fluttering open, a faint smile cracking a tired face. "What are you thinking about, darling?" she whispered. Ava studied her mother's beloved features, the lines etched by love and worry, the small mole near her left brow, and felt something break cleanly inside. She made her mouth curve. "Nothing important, Mom. Planning the future." Even as she said it, she knew the future had been sold. Victor had locked her in a cage made of good intentions and steel, using her love as the key, and he had smiled while he did it. The wedding was set for 6 weeks later, when the right people would be back in the city and not on Nantucket. At 62, Victor Hale stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the Chicago River glint and bend beneath a sky certain of itself. His empire had grown fat and glossy, endowments, headlines, a wing named after him, but admission to the one club that mattered most had eluded him. That afternoon, he'd endured 3 lawyers pretending kindness. "Our clients value historical connections," said the spokesman, James Harrington, with the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "It's nothing personal. Standards must be maintained." Standards. After they left, Victor sat a long time, rage cold and tidy, filing itself into drawers. He had built his practice from nothing. Over 35 Christmases and 100,000 patient hours, cutting open chests and holding beating hearts in his hands, fixing them his way. Men whose grandfathers had laughed at his father's accent now sent him their wives. Still, they reminded him. Still, he was common. That evening, he drove slowly down Astor Street and sat in his car outside the gutted Whitmore mansion. The windows looked back at him like tired eyes. Demolition crews would come next week and level the story. He remembered being young and tolerated, standing with a drink he couldn't afford, and listening at parties while Chicago's old families talked about symphonies and senators. He'd been on the periphery, allowed to gaze in as if through museum glass. The Whitmores were American aristocracy. There were photographs of Ava's great-great-grandfather riding with men who rode with men whose names were in textbooks. The family fortune had been built on early patents that made modern medicine possible. Even bankrupt, the Whitmore name had currency in rooms that ignored Victor's millions. He couldn't buy what he wanted. Back at his office, an idea crept in, cold and bright, and unspooled like a plan he had always known he would make. He commissioned research. The gambling debts her father had left behind were worse than whispered. Maria's heart was broken in serious, expensive ways, and Ava was exquisitely perfect for a transaction that required both optics and empathy. Beautiful, educated in the ways that matter to the right people, and desperate enough to turn a trap into a rescue. Predictably, Rowan did not receive the plan as a gift. He stormed into his father's office like a thunderhead. "You want me to marry a girl I've barely spoken to? Have you lost your mind?" "I want you to marry a Whitmore," Victor said, folding his hands on the file like this was a consult and he was delivering a diagnosis. "There's a significant difference. Her name, her lineage, her social standing predate this city's skyline. She will unlock every door your work hasn't." "What about Sloan?" Rowan fired back. "We've been together 2 years." The name held something like hope, and he flinched as he said it, like the word itself might be used against him. "Sloan Keating is a model," Victor said, not unkindly, but with a brutality that left no room for coddling. "She is beautiful. She is charming. She is unsuitable. She is for entertainment, Rowan, not for partnership." "And if I refuse?" Rowan asked, the line of his jaw so tight it could have cut through stone. Victor's eyes didn't blink. "Then you can explain to your patients why the head of neurosurgery at Hale Pavilion has suddenly found himself unavailable." The unspoken finished the sentence. Fired, whispered about, diminished. A guillotine of silence fell between them. That night, Rowan drove to Sloane's River North apartment. She opened the door, saw him, and then the truth arrived in her face. Resignation before the blow. "Your father's been circling that girl like a shark since the day her family went bankrupt," Sloane said softly when he told her. "Everyone saw it coming. Not you, apparently." She kissed him one last time with the flatness of mercy and closed the door. 6 weeks later, Rowan stood at the altar and watched a woman he did not know walk toward him, a cloud of silk around a spine made of iron and grief. Something inside him understood with painful clarity that he was trading a life he hated for one he feared he might deserve, his freedom for his father's ambition. He pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth to keep from putting anything human into his face. The penthouse at One Magnificent Mile had graced glossy pages twice, once for its minimalist art and once for its night views. Perched above the city like a cool observatory, it was all glass angles and expensive restraint. Within hours of moving in, Ava realized that luxury could echo, that silence had a temperature, and that this place was the loneliest place she had ever been. "Your room is down the hall," Rowan said, gesturing toward the east wing as if pointing out a fire exit. He barely glanced at her single suitcase nestling near the door like a shy animal. "Housekeeping comes Tuesday and Friday," he added, already walking toward his office. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like finality. Their first weeks discovered a routine of avoidance that functioned like choreography. He left for the hospital in the black before morning and returned long after night, when she had learned how to make tea in a dark kitchen without turning on lights. When they did cross, he offered politeness like samples on a tray, cordial, correct, clinical. She could not tell if she hated him or the part of herself that had agreed to this bargain. Ava poured herself into hospital hours with Maria. The private room that Victor had arranged could have been a hotel suite. Flowers daily, a view of the park, nurses who moved with practiced grace. Maria's color came back by degrees, but her eyes saw too much. "You're too thin, darling," she murmured, letting her fingers hover over Ava's wrist, as if she was afraid to bruise it. "Are you eating? Are they treating you?" She paused. "I'm fine, Mom." Ava smiled brightly enough to hurt. "Treatment's working. You look better. Thanks to your sacrifice," Maria whispered, tears gathering like pearls and then spilling. "My brave girl. What have I allowed you to do?" "You didn't allow anything," Ava lied, smoothing the blanket, smoothing the truth. "I chose this." They both held that fiction like a delicate piece of bone china. "Smile, and don't put it near the edge of the table." 3 weeks into the marriage, a crisis arrived in a small, ringing way. Rowan had left his personal phone charging on the kitchen island before leaving for a 20-hour shift. When it rang, Ava glanced, out of muscle memory, out of decency, and then, because the screen said unknown, she answered. "Rowan, you finally picked up." A woman's voice rushed, breathless, polished. "I've been trying you all day. I know you said you needed space, but I can't stop thinking about what we talked about us. I think I was too hasty. "I'm sorry," Ava said, steadying herself against the counter. "This isn't Dr. Hale. This is Mrs. Hale." Silence, then a laugh like a crystal glass shattering on tile. "Mrs. Hale," the woman repeated, the shape of it bitter on her tongue. "I see. Would Mrs. Hale be so kind as to tell my fiancé that Sloane called?" The word punched Ava in the chest. "Your fiancé? Oh, did he not mention that part?" Sloane's voice went bright and hard. 6 months, unofficially naturally, because the Hale Pavilion expansion needed headlines and the optics of an engagement would have been distracting. Plans changed, I suppose. Let him know I called. When Rowan dragged himself home that night, pale with exhaustion and hospital light, he found Ava waiting in the living room. The phone sat on the coffee table like evidence. "Sloane called," she said. Her voice had been sanded down to something flat. The argument was quiet and vicious, not a scene fit for neighbors, but a small, precise war. "You were engaged," Ava said. Not a question, a fact placed in the room between them. "You were promised to someone else, while your father was negotiating my mother's life." "Ex-fiancé," Rowan corrected, pouring whiskey he didn't drink and watching the amber liquid climb the glass. And it's irrelevant.
"How long before our wedding did you end it?" she asked.
The whiskey disappeared down his throat in one motion, and he didn't flinch as it burned. 2 days. The fuse lit. 2 days, not 3 months, not a year. He had stood next to her at an altar 24 hours and then some after unthreading a different woman from his future. The calculation of it was its own cruelty. Ava swallowed an acid rise. "Thank you for clarifying the timeline," she said. "It certainly puts our wedding day into perspective." She stood, composure cracking like a lake in spring. "Go to her, Rowan. Stop pretending you're trapped here with me when you keep running back to her." He grabbed his keys like a man fleeing a fire and flung open the door. "Fine," he said, voice sharp enough to wound. "At least with her, I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not." The door slammed, the echo rattling the glass, and Ava felt something inside her snap with the sound. The hospital gala at the Drake was everything she expected. Gold and cream, music engineered to make donors generous. The Anderson Ballroom's crystal chandeliers turned down to maximum elegance. The Hale family floated through the night as if choreographed. Victor holding court, Rowan doing the competent son act, his hand at Ava's back the exact right amount of possessive. They were beautiful. They were miserable. They were exactly what the papers would say they were. Perfect. Halfway through, Rowan leaned in, his breath brushing her ear so that to anyone watching it looked tender. "Darling, I have to take this. The hospital. Emergency consult." He slipped onto the terrace, phone in one hand. He left his personal cell on the table by mistake. It lit up seconds later, a message threaded under Sloane's name. "Missing you tonight. Wish I could be your date instead of pretending with her." Something went very still inside Ava. She picked up the phone, thumb hovering. It was a violation. It was a line. It was also the only way she could stop pretending that she didn't already know the answer to the question she had refused to ask. She guessed his passcode. The year his mother died had been on a plaque at the pavilion he worked in, and the messages unspooled like a second timeline. Plans and jokes and photographs she would not let herself look at. Dates that mapped themselves over the nights he had said emergency surgery and come home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. "Sorry about that." Rowan's voice behind her made her bones jolt. "Just a consult." He saw the phone in her hand, then the look on her face, which must have told him everything. His color dropped out, taking with it his script and his careful control. "Ava." "Emergency surgery," she said. The words were hushed, deadly. "Is that what you're calling it now?" Around them, a quartet swelled and glasses clinked, and laughter spiraled up to chandeliers, and all of it felt far away and obscene. "We should go home," he said. He reached for her arm. She moved before he could touch her. The ride back was a quiet suffocation. Once the apartment door clicked shut, she let the rage she had tamped down blossom into something cold and clean. 3 months, she said. "We have been married 3 months, and you have not stopped seeing her. Not for a single day." "Let me explain," he began. "Explain what?" she shot back. "Explain how you lied to my face every night you came home late. How you climbed into this bed smelling of someone else's skin while I smiled for your father's cameras." He tugged at his tie like it was strangling him. "Our marriage isn't real," he said too loud. "You said it yourself. It's a business arrangement." "An arrangement I assumed came with fidelity," she said, voice breaking. "Did you think I wouldn't care? That I was so pathetic, so grateful for your father's charity I'd just accept the humiliation?" "You're not being humiliated," he said uselessly. "I am your wife." The word tore out of her raw. "Whatever the reasons, I am legally, socially, publicly your wife, and you are making a fool out of me." His composure finally cracked, anger flashing sharp. "What did you expect from me? A fairy tale? Love? Some impossible ending where everything gets fixed by a kiss?" "I expected basic respect," she said. "I thought you'd honor the commitment you made, even if you didn't want to make it." Words crowded her throat, months of swallowed feeling elbowing their way through. Tears she'd refused to allow now streaked down her face. "I gave up everything for this," she whispered. "My freedom, my future, my chance at ever being loved in any real way, and you can't even grant me the dignity of being faithful." "I never asked you to sacrifice anything," he said, but without conviction, and the line landed like a confession. "You did," she cried. "Every time you treated me like a stranger in our home. Every time you made me feel like a guest at my own table. Every time you used this marriage like an inconvenience you had to endure. You were asking me to shrink, to disappear, so your life could feel unchanged." He stared then, anger draining to shock. He had never seen her like this, the steel in her spine laid bare. "Ava." "And the worst part," she whispered, "is that I was making excuses for you, telling myself you were trapped like me, but you weren't. You had it all, the social benefits of a Whitmore wife and the comfort of a woman you actually wanted. Get out." He stood there a long second, as if some other answer might appear. Nothing did. He grabbed his keys and left, the door shuddering in its frame. The silence that followed was obscene. Outside, Rowan's engine roared like a blown artery. His hands shook on the wheel. Ava's words threaded through his mind. Needle and stitch. "Coward. Liar. You had it all." He pressed his foot down as if speed could outrun truth. Lights blurred, Chicago smearing into streaks. He barely registered the red at Wacker and Michigan. The semi-truck was already deep in the intersection when the world exploded. Metal howling, glass spraying, the sickening accordion of a body meeting something that would not move. In the second before darkness dragged him under, Rowan saw Ava's face. Not angry, not accusing, just broken. And then the sirens rushed to find him, to see if they could stitch a person back together from pieces. Months later, the penthouse no longer felt like an exhibit. Luxury still clung to surfaces like a sheen of gold, but something inside had softened and warmed. There was a soft blanket draped over the sofa, a mug half full of chamomile gone cool, a new photo taped in the kitchen. Ava and Maria making faces, their foreheads pressed together. And in the living room, where an expensive abstract once lorded over nothing, a hospital bed had been wheeled in and quietly rewritten the geography of their lives. Ava moved through the apartment with a grace that had once been performance and now felt like being. In her hands, a tray with a steaming bowl of chicken soup and crackers stacked like a tiny fence. She set it beside his wheelchair, which was parked near the floor-to-ceiling window and the winter light. The sun turned Rowan's sharp features tender. "Lunch," she said softly, a small command wrapped in warmth. "I can feed myself," he muttered, pride flaring like an old injury. "I know," she said, settling into a chair. "Humor me. Let me do it today." She lifted a spoon, her fingers steady, and did not flinch when their hands brushed. A current moved between them, small and precise, like electricity finding a path. He opened his mouth, the spoon touching his bottom lip, and swallowed. They didn't look away. "You've gotten better at this," he murmured after a few spoonfuls. His voice no longer felt like a blunt instrument. It had edges and softness both. "At taking care of you?" she said lightly, trying to step around the sudden intimacy like a puddle on the sidewalk. "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "At being near me without flinching." Her smile faltered. "You haven't bitten me in 2 weeks," she said, and the joke made him laugh in a way that shook something loose inside her chest. The sound didn't have his old bitterness in it. It was unguarded. It sounded like a man surprised to find delight. "Do you think I was born this bitter?" he asked suddenly. The air shifted. "No," she said after considering the question as if it deserved time. "I think someone, or something, taught you." The spoon paused mid-air. "My mother died when I was 8, he said. Ovarian cancer." The words sounded like pebbles dropped in a well. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. "I learned the smell of antiseptic before I learned multiplication." I watched her disappear in increments. My father buried himself in work because he never could stand the sight of anything that looked like weakness. So I learned to read morphine dosages before fractions. I learned to be the man of the house when I was a child. He made a harsh, small sound that was not a laugh. When she died, I swore I'd never let anyone matter that much again."
He looked at her then. Really looked, not the way he had looked at her at their wedding. Stripped of pretense, his gray eyes were more human and therefore more dangerous.
Sloane was perfect for that. She's beautiful and shallow in a way that felt safe. I could never get cut.
"And me?" Ava asked, voice no louder than the steam curling from the soup. "You terrified me," he said. The truth landed softly and detonated anyway. "From the first day. Because you saw through all of it. You weren't impressed. You didn't bow. And the closer you got," his voice thinned, "the more I wanted to let you matter." The doorbell chimed and they both startled, like teenagers. Ava stood, grateful and bereft, and returned with a bouquet of white tulips wrapped in brown paper. The smell was sharp and clean, like spring had walked into winter's house. "No name," she said, glancing up. Rowan cleared his throat, a faint flush coloring his cheekbones. "They're from me." "You sent these?" she asked, surprise and something else widening her eyes. He looked suddenly boyish in his awkwardness. "I thought it was time I said thank you properly." Tucked into the tulips, a card. His handwriting was precise, like a surgeon's notes, but the words themselves were careful. "For the woman who stayed when she didn't have to. Who saw me when I couldn't see myself. This is just the beginning. Rowan." Her breath caught. She crossed the distance slowly, sat at the edge of his bed and pressed a lingering kiss to his forehead. It was a benediction and a forgiveness and a question. "This meant more than you know," she whispered into his skin. He smiled, small and real. "Then maybe I'm finally learning." That night, they ended up on the sofa with the movie whispering on mute. The hospital bed had been pushed to the corner, as if the room wanted to try being an ordinary living room again. Ava told him about her first waitressing job at a diner off State Street, how she'd spilled a pitcher of iced tea into a councilman's lap, and then had to apologize to his publicist and his wife, who were not the same person. She used her hands too much when she talked, and laughed at herself with an ease that made his ribs ache. Rowan watched her until the movie was just light on a wall. There, in the flicker, she was radiant and unguarded. A person whose entire life hadn't been a duty. He realized with something like shock that he was falling. Not into an arrangement, not into a need that looked like addiction, into her. He didn't say it, the words weren't ready yet, but his last wall gave way like old plaster. Later, when she slipped into her room, she left the door ajar and exhaled as she unbuttoned her blouse, relief sliding over her bones. City light poured through the long window, painting her back silver and gold. She reached for a soft sweater. Rowan shouldn't have been there. He had woken from a dream of tulips and knives and needed water. As he passed her doorway, he didn't mean to look. He looked anyway, and time snagged. Her back was pale and luminous in the city light, hair dark and heavy over her shoulder, waist a gentle curve. Then she turned and saw him, and color rose to her cheeks. "Rowan," she said, clutching the blouse closed, more surprised than angry. He looked stricken, shame and awe fighting it out. I'm sorry," he stammered. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she said, pulling on the sweater with hands that trembled. "Just forget it." Neither of them did. He lay awake later, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, the image returned, not as something lewd, but as recognition. She had been his caregiver, his obligation, his mirror. Suddenly, she was just a woman. The wanting came like a knife, sharp, clean, undeniable. At nearly 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep. He pushed himself slowly upright, reached for his cane, and made his way to the kitchen. The apartment was dim and hushed, except for the kettle murmuring on the stove. She was already there, barefoot in an oversized university sweatshirt that hung like a dress, hair down, rubbing her arms against a draft. She turned at the sound of his cane's soft tap. "You're awake," she whispered. "Couldn't sleep," he said, voice rough and newly vulnerable. "Do you mind if I join you?" She hesitated only a heartbeat. "Of course." They sat with steaming mugs and watched the city's lights flicker like a fallen constellation. At first, silence buzzed between them, heavy with the unsaid. He set his mug down carefully, like this came first. "Ava, "I need to tell you something about earlier," he began. Her heart jerked against her ribs. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, firm. He leaned forward, held her eyes as if tethering himself to them. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy, I swear. But when I saw you," he exhaled, frustrated with his own inadequacy, "I can't stop thinking about it. Not because I'm a creep," he added quickly, the urgency almost sweet, "but because for the first time since we met, I really saw you. Not the woman caught in this arrangement. Not the person who's taken care of me. You, a woman." The words hung like fragile glass. "You don't have to apologize," she said, and her voice wobbled, "because I liked it." His head snapped up. She swallowed and pushed the truth the last inch. "It was the first time I felt like you were looking at me like a woman. Not like someone you were stuck with." His breath hitched. Slowly, as if torquing a rib back into place, he reached up and traced the line of her jaw. Her skin shivered under his touch. She didn't pull away. His hand cupped her face. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip as if asking a question. Then he leaned in. The first touch of his mouth was tentative, a question asked with 1,000 unsaid words trailing it. It trembled with months of tension that hadn't found a home. He started to pull back. She didn't let him. She closed the small distance, answered the question with a kiss that took his breath like wind at the top of a building. The second kiss deepened instantly. Hesitation fell away like a poorly knotted bow. Her hand slid to his shoulders, the fabric soft under her fingers. He wrapped an arm around her waist, and the simple geometry of bodies closing a space made them both exhale. Something broke, a dam, a pretense, and everything they had been holding back rushed through. Time narrowed to this, the taste and heat and dizzy rightness of it. When at last they separated, foreheads touching, breath uneven, he whispered, "If I keep going, I won't be able to stop." She lifted her gaze. For the first time, there was no surgeon, no son, no obligation in his eyes. Just a man asking permission. "Then don't stop," she breathed. He didn't. The kisses turned slow and reverent, as if he had discovered something rare and wanted to learn every angle. He guided her toward his bedroom, the room that had been fortress and exile both, and she followed with no hesitation at all, her hand in his as if she had always been meant to hold it. There was no hurry. He touched her as if she might shatter or he might, tracing her jaw, brushing hair from her brow the way she had done for him 100 graceless times. He slid the big sweatshirt over her head and reveled in the sight of her, the way she trembled, the trust in it, the antidote to every empty thing he had used to make himself numb. She had been loved once, a lifetime ago, but this felt like a different language, like heat returning to frozen hands, painful and miraculous. The morning came in soft strips of gold. Ava stirred and didn't know for a heartbeat where she was. Then she felt the weight of Rowan's arm over her waist and the steady breath against her hair. It had happened. She turned carefully to find him watching her with a wonder so sincere it made tears prickle. He lifted a hand and brushed her cheekbone with his thumb. "Was that real?" she whispered, voice wrecked by too many emotions. "Did I really just sleep with Rowan Hale?" "You did," he said, faint smile curving. "And it was the most real thing I've ever known." "Sloane would never believe you," she said, and the laugh that came was half nerves and half relief. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something fierce and new. "Forget Sloane. Forget the past," he said, drawing closer. "Last night wasn't just passion. Not for me, not with you. It was love." The word made something in her stumble. She searched his face for performance and found none. "Love," she repeated. "Love," he confirmed, the conviction thick in his voice. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel empty. You filled all the spaces I didn't even know were hollow." She laughed, incredulous and luminous, even as tears tracked along her temples. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he whispered, kissing her nose, her mouth, the corner of her smile. A man who had found something sacred and reverenced it. In the days that followed, the penthouse learned new sounds. The scrape of chairs as they stayed at the kitchen table after dinner, knees bumping like teenagers.
the clatter of pans as they cooked together, badly, the quiet, ordinary way their hands found each other when they passed in the hall. It wasn't seamless. Sometimes Rowan's old bitterness still flared and Ava's anger still found a coal. But it was real, and for the woman who had spent her life in service and sacrifice, waking up to love felt like stepping into sunlight after a long tunnel. For the man who had grown walls like safety, letting someone in felt like dismantling a fortress and discovering it had always been a prison. 3 months later, Rowan woke to cool sheets and the wrongness of a void where warmth had been. A sound came from the bathroom, the unmistakable, horrible sound of retching. He forgot his cane and limped, his pain a secondary concern. She knelt by the toilet, her sweatshirt hanging loose, skin pale under the harsh light. She rinsed her mouth and saw him in the mirror. "Did I wake you?" she asked weakly. "Are you okay?" he said, his hands already on her shoulders, steadying her. "I'm fine," she insisted. She looked anything but. "I think the pizza last night didn't agree with me." He tilted his head, the diagnostic part of his brain, that sharp machine, switching on. He took in the small details, the new softness to her features, the pallor, the faint shadow under her eyes. A possibility accrued, and his worry melted into something else. A dawning joy so bright it embarrassed him. "Let me ask you something," he said carefully. "When was your last period?" Ava frowned, trying to catch a date that wouldn't hold still. "I don't know. A while ago. You know I'm irregular when I'm stressed." His smile bloomed like the first tulip in spring. "Irregular for how long?" "I don't know, Rowan. Maybe 3 months?" She narrowed her eyes. "Why are you smiling like that?" He laughed, a burst of sound like a door thrown open to light. He kissed her temple and ran out. Minutes later he returned, flushed and breathless, with a crumpled paper pharmacy bag. He set a small box on the counter like he was offering her a diamond. "Are you serious?" she asked, half horrified. "We can't just—" "We can," he said, giddy now, "and we should." He pressed the box into her hands, almost reverent. "Come on, let's find out." Her hands shook as she went into the bathroom. Outside, he paced and prayed in a language he didn't know he had, running his fingers through his hair again and again like it would keep the universe steady. When she opened the door, her face was drained. She held the test out like it might explode. "I can't look," she whispered. He took it. Silence pooled, thick and immediate. Then his face broke. He looked up, gray eyes shining. "Ava," he said, voice unsteady, "we're having a baby." She gasped, her hand coming to her mouth like she needed to keep the scream inside. "No, are you serious?" Her knees went loose. Terror crashed into disbelief, and beneath them something like a sun rose. "I never thought I'd have this," Rowan whispered into her hair as he held her tight and shook with quiet sobs. "Not after the accident. Not after everything I've destroyed. But you," he pulled back enough to frame her face, "you didn't just give me back a life. You gave me a future." "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, laughing and crying both, palms warm on his chest. "You don't have to be," he said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "We'll be ready together. You and me, always." She believed him. She let the happiness flood her, fierce and clean. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and the promise in it felt like a vow that meant more than the one in the basilica had. They held each other as morning climbed through the blinds, the plastic stick on the counter like a tiny talisman. Their story wasn't over. It had just begun to tell the truth. At the obstetrician's office, the room was cool and quiet enough to hear breathing. Ava lay on the cushioned table, Rowan's hand locked in hers, both eyes fixed on the screen where a grainy universe spun into being. The technician moved the wand with gentle expertise. Then a flicker, a pulsing point of light in the dark sea. "That's your baby's heartbeat," the tech said, warmth in her tone. Rowan made a sound like a sob strangled at birth. Tears slid down his face unabashed. Ava turned her head and saw him undone, vulnerable and new, and her heart ached with love so strong she worried it could break ribs. "Our baby," he whispered, bringing her fingers to his mouth. In the weeks that followed, Rowan transformed into a man Ava didn't know he could be. The detached, obsessive surgeon became absurdly doting. The kind of partner who bought 3 different flavors of crackers in case one helped with nausea more than the others. Who learned everything about prenatal vitamins as if he'd need to recite it. Who argued with a paint consultant about the exact right color for a nursery that would catch morning light and feel like hope. Ava teased him and treasured every bit of it. One afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Ava, my dear," the voice said, and the circle completed itself in a single sound. It was Victor. "I need to speak with you and Rowan. It's important." His tone had never sounded like that, softened, scraped clean of show. When he arrived at the penthouse later, he looked as if something had taken 10 years out of him and kept them. His predatory confidence had eroded, leaving sorrow and something like shame. He sat carefully on the sofa, eyes moving between them with an expression Ava had never seen live on his face. Regret. "I came to apologize," he said, and the words themselves seemed to exhaust him. "For everything. For manipulating you into this marriage, for using your mother's illness as leverage, for destroying Rowan's relationship with Sloane to serve my own ambition." Rowan stiffened beside Ava, a hurt child suddenly visible in a man's body. Ava touched his arm, grounding him. Victor swallowed, continued, voice thickening until it threatened to break. "I have spent my life trying to buy something money can't: respect, acceptance, belonging. And in the process, I nearly destroyed my only son." He turned to look at Rowan. "You deserved better from me. You both did." Rowan fought with himself visibly, training, doing battle with feeling. "Why now?" he asked. The words cracked as if they'd had to be broken free. "Because I've seen the way you look at each other," Victor said simply, eyes shifting to Ava's small swell beneath her dress. "I've seen the love you built in spite of me. And I realized I was about to lose the chance to know my grandchild because I could not pry my pride out of my own hands." Silence stretched, heavy as a blanket. Ava surprised herself by speaking first. "Victor," she said deliberately, "what you did was wrong. It was manipulative, it was cruel." She didn't soften the edges. Then she drew a breath. "But it gave us to each other. Without the forced marriage, without the impossible situation, maybe Rowan and I never would have found our way to this." Rowan looked at her like she had done something miraculous and ordinary all at once. He turned back to his father and found a word he had not used in years. "Dad," he said, and it sounded raw. "You taught me about medicine, excellence, ambition. You didn't teach me about forgiveness. Ava did. Because of her, I'm willing to try." Victor broke then, not in the way of water released, but like a structure finally allowed to shed its scaffolding. He wept quietly, shoulders shaking. "Thank you," he said when he could. "Thank you." That night, Rowan took Ava to his favorite place on a hidden stretch of the Riverwalk, where the city glitters differently, closer, kinder. Her belly curved gently under her dress. "Did you really forgive him?" she asked, head resting on his shoulder. He watched the lights reflect off the black river and let a long silence answer first. "I'm trying," he said finally, "for you, for our baby, because you taught me that anger makes you a prisoner to the past. I want to live here, with you." She smiled into his shoulder. "My mother is already planning a ridiculous baby shower," she warned. "She has opinions about petit fours." "Let her," he said, placing his hand on her abdomen, awe loosening his voice. "After everything, let her." He turned to her, love spilling into his eyes so fully it made her breath shake. "We're really doing this. Making a family." "We are," she said, covering his hand with hers. "We're going to mess it up sometimes. We're going to learn, and we're going to love this baby with everything we have. Just like I love you," Rowan whispered, "with everything that I am." 6 months later, a delivery room bloomed with fluorescent light and adrenaline. Ava's hair stuck damply to her temples, and her hand crushed Rowan's as another contraction wrenched her body toward the end of one story and the beginning of another. "You're doing so well, my love," Rowan murmured. His surgeon's voice had lost its iron and filled with something human and tremulous. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth that smelled faintly of lavender from their linen closet. "One more. You've got one more." "I can see the head," the obstetrician said, cheerful and focused. "One more big push." Ava pushed and the world split and then re-knit around a new sound. A cry pierced the room, furious and breathtakingly beautiful. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, and laid a small purple-pink creature, wailing and perfect, onto Ava's chest. Rowan looked down at his daughter, and came apart in the cleanest way he ever had. Tears fell unchecked. He touched the tiny nose, the miniature fingers, the dark fuzz of hair that looked like Ava's. "She's perfect," he said, voice breaking. "You're perfect," he said to Ava, the words catching on love. "We made her." Ava laughed and sobbed, coasting on a wave of exhausted relief. "We actually made her." "Eleanor," Rowan said suddenly, eyes on their girl with reverence. He looked at Ava, a question asking to be blessed. "Can we name her Eleanor? After my mother?" Ava's eyes filled again and overflowed, new tears with a different salt. "Eleanor Rose Hale," she whispered, folding Maria into the name too. "It's perfect." The penthouse transformed again. Minimalist was replaced with plush blankets tossed over chairs and a bassinet tucked where an Eames chair had once been admired. 3 in the morning sounded like soft cries and off-key lullabies, Rowan fumbling the swaddle for the 6th time, and then beaming when he got it right, like he had learned a better surgery. Maria visited daily, color brighter than any medication could make it, making soups, cooing, claiming Eleanor during Ava's naps like a queen granted an heir. "I never thought I would get to see this," she whispered to Ava one afternoon, her voice thick. "After the heart attack, after the house, I thought my life was over."
"It wasn't over," Ava said, watching her mother cradle the future. "It just changed. We started over," and they had. Not into a life measured in invitations and nameplates on walls, but one measured in small mercies and deep forgiveness, in resilience, and the kind of love that grows in soil turned by grief and watered with honest work. One evening, Rowan came home from a long day to find slanted sunlight painting gold across the living room. Ava was asleep on the sofa, Eleanor dozing in the bassinet beside her, one tiny fist opened like a star. Rowan stood in the doorway and took in the sight, the two centers of his reconfigured universe. He thought of the man he had been, the arrogant, angry stranger at the altar whispering, "Let's get this over with." He had believed that day to be an ending, a surrender to a script he hadn't written. He smiled now, so full the smile hurt. He understood. That day had been a beginning written in a language he hadn't known how to read. He crossed the room silently and knelt, resting his cheek near Ava's hand without waking her, listening to his daughter breathe, the city beyond and below humming along. Outside, on the glass, a reflection showed 3 figures gathered close. In it, Rowan looked like a man who had finally become the person his mother would have recognized. A man who had let himself be held, and in doing so, had learned to hold. A man, at last, who had chosen love and allowed love to choose him back.